to make $400 billion in earnings, effective earnings, you'd have to make as much as Apple, Microsoft, and Google combined in a single year. All right. Anyone that thinks that this is some walk in the park to put money in Elon's pocket is insanely misinformed. To earn the so-called $1 trillion is probably one of the hardest thing ever done in business ever. To me, it is like stuffing the entire industrial revolution in one enterprise, one company, Tesla. And we are partaking in watching how the sausage is made. We're not just sitting down in a restaurant eating like every other company. Apple never really tells you much about how the sausage is made. We're in the kitchen and we're watching it happen. I've got the world's best product, insatiable demand. I can't make a tenth of that demand. I mean, that's a high quality problem, but it's also a failure. Never bet against Elon because he's pretty likely going to do it. And then we're going to watch some crazy scale out things happening. I can't even get through the day without my head exploding thinking about all this stuff, let alone having to juggle it from a planning and execution cycle.
Well, we've got an exciting show for you today. I've got Phil Beisel with me, and we are going to be talking about the insane boss battle ahead for Elon Musk and his compensation package, and a truly mind-boggling just amount of effort and achievement that will have to go into him reaching that final tranche. And let's get right into it, Phil. So one of the things that Elon Musk needs to accomplish is an EBITDA of $400 billion. And take it from there. Like what is $400 billion equate to?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Right? In terms of earnings power of current companies that people can kind of compare it to.
It is literally insane. So to make $400 billion in earnings, effective earnings, in 4 consecutive quarters, which is the requirement, you could think of it as annualized earnings for a given company. You'd have to make as much as Apple, Microsoft, and Google combined in a single year. All right. So Tesla is nowhere near that today. I don't know what its earnings are, sub 15. So that's an extremely tall order. The top dog here so far in earnings was on the tail end of COVID with the Ramco selling oil at $238 billion in earnings. So think about this, then that's why we call it the final boss. It requires Musk to achieve $400 billion in 4 consecutive quarters. By the way, just for reference, NVIDIA in 24 was 34 billion. So I wrote this post about it. Musk comment on it. Do you have that one?
I do. Yep.
Yeah. And he said, it sure is a tall order. Anyone can buy Tesla stock right now and come along for the ride. There will inevitably be some bumps along the way, but it's truly an immense amount of work. I think these goals can be accomplished. With immense amount of work, these goals can be accomplished. And after 23 million hits, I think the desire to hear Musk comment on this was really very, very high, because of all the things that, if you look at that, there's some people who made, of course, there was so many negative comments on the whole comp plan through, so much noise in the system. But some people say, oh, these things are easy to achieve. When I looked at that number and I looked at, clearly that Musk would want to accomplish that. And I mean, the good news for everybody listening that owns Tesla stock, that if he were to accomplish $400 billion in earnings, we're talking about a 30 to 50 multiple. That stock is, market cap wise, 12 to 20 plus trillion dollars. It's not going to be just $8.5 trillion and we're done. As per the plan, the other components. But the immense amount of things that he has to do, I wrote a post on this and I said, to me, it is like stuffing the entire industrial revolution in one enterprise, one company, Tesla, of the things that have to be done. And the two products, I mean, it first off, it requires a great product hitting an unbelievable TAM, big market at the right time. It really, and lucky for us, Tesla has two products in the mix, Robotaxi and Optimus. Most of the value will be ultimately in Optimus, but and these are all based on Tesla's core strengths, in particular its autonomy AI, and so that's the good news. The difficult part of this is everything else. It is extraordinary to think about what Musk will have to do to move things around, move levers, invest capital to build these products at scale that the market will probably eat up
Yeah.
and desire.
Knocking down bottlenecks of so many varieties that are so hard in so many different places, all simultaneously, in order to achieve, like, it would be a symphony of business perfection.
Yes, to think that it's funny how you see people out there. It's like, I mean, obviously, the silly critics are, he was paid $1 trillion or something. That's obviously nuts. But to earn the so-called $1 trillion is not some walk in the park. In fact, it's probably one of, if not the hardest thing ever done in business ever. It will require everything to operate pre-planned in perfection, immense amount of capital. A couple of months ago, or at least about 2 months ago, I was talking on X and I said that Musk would have to create a fab, and everybody told me I was stupid. And the reason I was thinking about it is that this is around the announcement when it said we're going to do this exclusive deal with Samsung to build the AI 6 chip. And I started thinking about that. I was like, well, wait a minute, that from a production capacity, that's not going to come anywhere near what's ultimately required. 2 chips per product, 2 chips in every autonomous vehicle, likely 2 chips. These are the AI inference chips in Optimus. And he's, if he soaks up all the capacity by Taiwan, Semi, Samsung, in these higher end AI chips, he still can't. He will not have enough to build for the demand of these products.
And that doesn't even factor in the number of those inference chips that they're going to want to include in the training loop for both FSD and for Optimus, which will be a very large number as well.
Yep. What Hans is speaking about here is that a lot of training is moving towards reinforcement learning, and reinforcement learning is inference within a training cycle. So it's effectively, of the 100,000 plus GPUs that sit around Cortex, there's about 40 or 50,000 hardware foreboards sitting there running inference at the, with the same stack, if you will, that the car does, because it is exactly the same software stack to do reinforcement learning training and other types of generative stuff for simulation and so forth. But and then, of course, Musk has talked about doing inference in space, or at least compute in space, whatever you want, whatever we'll call it, data center in space, for lack of.
At an absolutely insane scale.
An insane scale. So there's no doubt that he has, and when he speaks about fab, he called it the terafab, and he's talking about required production that is, I did some compute on this, and I felt that the size of the facility alone would make the Gigafactory in Texas look small. To build Optimus at a 100 million run rate, you're going to need about 10x the floor space that you need for what you have for a Gigafactory in Texas, which is already 10 million square feet, the largest automotive plant in the world. So these are not, my mind explodes thinking about them. He's got to deal with them day in and day out, though. And every bit of the planning for this has to start tomorrow. He can't get himself pinched and so, I built the world's best. I've got the world's best product, insatiable demand. I can't make a tenth of that demand. I mean, that's a high quality problem, but it's also a failure. Imagine if Apple said, hey, we've just put out this iPhone 17. Can't wait to sell it to you for Christmas. Oh, only one out of 10 of you will get one. He can't find himself there. And yet his problem is much bigger than iPhone manufacturing supply chain by a couple, maybe not an order of magnitude, but by a couple factors for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to coordinate all of the, there is no existing supply chain right now for the actuators for Optimus. There's a lot of the actuators that are fine. Especially it looks like they're using pretty traditional rotary designs for a lot of the big things, the hips and things like that. But the hands, the actuators that have a combination of the power density necessary to do all the things that hands do, the sensitivity to do it as dexterously as human hands do it, and then to do all those things reliably, like thousands and thousands and thousands of failure-free cycles. Like that actuator doesn't exist at all anywhere. Right. And so you've got to first be able to create the prototype of that thing. And then once then the hard part starts. Then you have to build the supply chain for that thing. So there's that. That's one of the big challenges. Then you've got batteries that, we're going to be consuming a lot more batteries in this future of autonomous vehicles and robots. And so now we've got to massively scale up battery production compared to where we're at today. And apparently in his mind, those challenges, which I think are, pretty much insurmountable for anyone besides Elon, those are the small challenges. Yeah. He still thinks the chips are the bigger challenge.
Yeah, it's anyone that thinks that this is some walk in the park to, put money in Elon's pocket is insanely misinformed. I mean, like, beyond insanely misinformed. It's so silly to even think that way. Beyond the motivation alone, the questioning is just this requires execution at his amount of dedicated execution. I mean, remember, he also happens to effectively run SpaceX and XAI, and he's got a few other little companies running around there too. And he's, so, and what's interesting about all of this is that Elon posted this. It's so obvious to everyone, but he's kind of said it looks like there's a surprising amount of convergence starting to occur across my companies. And that's tricky in so many ways, but SpaceX as a partner for Tesla, that just go hand in hand. I mean, chips provided to SpaceX for a data center in space, Optimus bots for eventual Moon or Mars deployment, Starlink, both at the cellular level and the native comms level for every vehicle and Optimus. I guarantee every Optimus will be talking to a central cloud through Starlink. Guarantee it. Not even a question in my mind. Every single one will be online 24/7 with probably Starlink cellular and, of course, local Wi-Fi. Anyway, these things are extraordinary to think that he has to pull these things together and plan. The hardest part is planning in advance to make sure you don't get pinched. Especially, it's one thing if you're planning at some nominal scale, but we're talking about planning. And of course, the question is, how do you get ahead of this without spending literally hundreds of billions of dollars? I mean, I don't know. I think there's maybe shy of $50 billion on Tesla's balance sheet and cash sitting around. That is not going to look like a lot of money. People were talking about, he's got so much cash, he should have done buybacks. I'm thinking he was husbanding that money for, we won't call it a rainy day, we'll call it every day going forward. So yeah, I mean, I can't even get through the day without my head exploding thinking about all this stuff, let alone having to juggle it from a planning and execution cycle. So the guy's worth $1 trillion for sure.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, I wanted to go to that post that you mentioned. He said, my companies are surprisingly in some ways,
Yeah,
uh, yeah, my companies are surprisingly in some ways trending towards convergence. And one of the things that I go back to is he has been pounding the table on, trying to climb the Kardashev scale.
right,
And if we're going to do that, that means, we've got to harvest a lot more of the sun's energy. If we're going to harvest a lot more of the sun's energy, that's probably going to happen in space. And
right,
what are you going to use that energy for in space? It's probably going to be a lot of compute. And so as we, I think regardless of what the timelines to AGI and artificial superintelligence are, Elon is very convinced that they're near, and he is preparing himself for the world where those events occur. And yeah, I think that, the impending, I guess, excitement and nervousness and, potential like fear around what all could happen when artificial superintelligence arrives in the solar system really pushes him to want to say, okay, like we need to really start making progress towards these Kardashev level 1 and Kardashev level 2 type goals, because that is something that not only is possible but almost necessary in that world. And so
yeah,
that's where I came up with this post that says if we're really going to start climbing the Kardashev scale, we need extremely low cost launch, we need energy, compute, algorithms, robots, and high bandwidth interfaces. And so regardless of what structure people want to try to get Elon to put these companies together in, like
right,
they're coming together with a coherent set of goals and objectives.
right. That's
And space, yeah, and that includes all SpaceX, Tesla, XAI, and
yeah,
Neuralink.
they're yeah,
I mean,
exactly. I
even
mean,
Boring Company, but yeah.
it's yeah, on the kind of fringe, but yes, I understand what you meant. Um, yeah, I mean, CERN did a great post on how you might combine these
Hmm.
companies today, and I urge people to take a look at that. And he was talking about how you might stock swap and the complexities of doing this when there's a public company in the mix. And but besides that, my comment was is that these companies are already operating and
Hmm.
will continue to do. Like you don't get anything into space without SpaceX. SpaceX is mass to space. There is no other real. There's nobody at scale. Um, and so as just from that principle alone, and then what is the thing that is utilized there, which is basically most of the satellite to space today are Starlink deployments, which is I think running at I don't know 500,000 or so new customers a month. It's kind of crazy. I think I'm right
and
about that.
and
Um,
accelerating.
and accelerating. And to me, the future of internet on planet Earth is Starlink. That's probably how we'll all start to remove. There'd be no real reason to spend anybody to spend time on anything that's terrestrial, cable, optical kind of stuff, except for backhaul. It'd be kind of a waste of time and effort. I mean, everything will be wireless, and certainly the major carriers can be cut out of the loop. There's no reason to. I mean,
Well,
when you have
we need their
latency,
bandwidth, but other than that,
we need their bandwidth. Yeah, but I mean, if you deploy enough satellites, and this is a big. All these problems are huge scale problems. But the point is that it's if you can step on the gas pedal, you can deploy it. That's the point, right? Like if you can go from, I think there's about 10,000 um, Starlink satellites today, roughly. I think I'm about right. I think Musk's sort of total plan is like 40K. If you could do 40K tomorrow on the V3 satellites, much higher bandwidth, that's a lot of bandwidth. But then to be insatiable demand because effectively, what he's doing there is he's effectively replacing. I mean, there's a proprietary protocol, proprietary comms model, which the people are familiar with, and they buy the Starlink terminals. And when we talk about people adopting Starlink at an unprecedented rate, that's all those little beamforming terminals. But he's doing cellular, right? And so when I think about, like, say, Optimus connecting, it's just really, in a sense, an off-the-shelf 5G chip that's in the car, or Optimus connected through Starlink. Same thing with our phones, by, I don't know, version 18 of iPhone, or maybe 19, probably 18, those things will be able to connect to Starlink cellular. So yeah, there's a lot there to get that to go. I mean, that's an insane amount of things that have. I mean, I was going to say nothing to do with Tesla, but it has everything to do with Tesla. That's it's like inference or training in space are probably AI 6, AI 7, AI 8 chips. Today, where we are today is we have vehicles deployed with what is formerly known as Hardware 4, currently known as AI 4, same thing, just different nomenclature. By end of 26, that'll be replaced with AI 5, which is probably nearing end of design and will start early fab, a couple months. I don't know. I'm not really sure what the time frame is, but Musk has talked about that chip coming online, for actual vehicle, and ultimately Optimus, therefore probably end of, like, early 27, late 26, and that chip alone, that chip is super interesting because it's very much, people that know how to do great software know that they want to orient the hardware towards the software. And so that chip has the benefit of being designed with FSD and Optimus AI in mind, which are effectively the same AI. And that's really amazing, and it really benefits Tesla as a company, but the teams to be able to have a chip to do some of the, like, as the software team iterates through its design and architecture, like as it moved from 13 to 14 of FSD, it became quite clear that a lot of some of the heavy lifting that was done in software alone could be moved on chip. And so they did that. When Musk talked about 40X, he was talking about this particular little algorithm called softmax. And it was done in software, and it was slow. I mean, so it would be done on the CPU, not the GPU. And the team has moved that on silicon. So they'll get a 40X performance increase. And by the way, that's a power decrease too. So these chips today are really designed, or the AI5 chip at least, is heavily designed for these edge device, Optimus as well as FSD. And that would sound good enough, but it's not close to where we need to stop with these chips, right? So what's in 6 and what's in 7, I'm sure the roadmap expands to include more general use case. In other words, using a lot of integer math on the AI5 chip. They've settled on integer-based inference for FSD. They think they get what they need out of that. They get fast compute. It's easier to do integer compute versus floating point. But you probably don't build, like NVIDIA builds a kitchen sink chip, right? NVIDIA is an amazing company. They produce amazing chips, but those chips have to have a lot of structure on them that is sort of a kitchen sink. Like, they don't know who their customer is. I mean, well, they know who their customer is, but they don't have an integrated team demanding a certain thing. They have, 5,000 teams demanding lots of things. And so a certain number of those things make it into silicon, and other things are held in the software CUDA layer or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're building a generalized infrastructure chip. Now, what Tesla has to do is, as it leans into AI 6, AI 7, and 8, or whatever is on the roadmap, they're going to have to lean into more of those generalized use cases, unless it's just for their own purposed use. So that's.
But even for their own purpose use, algorithms are changing so rapidly that I think at least some additional generality is going to be highly beneficial.
Sure.
So
I mean, this is not a chip that you couldn't pick up and do something other than FSD on today. I'm talking about AI5 in particular, but it's a beautiful, beautiful thing today to see that the hardware team, chip design, hardware, and software are an integrated team. This is, I can't emphasize, from my engineering background, what a beautiful thing that is, right? And we're talking about down to the chip level. We're not talking about just a hardware team that is expressing hardware for software by building their own boards and sourcing, the best chip for the job. They're talking about going at the silicon level, right? That's another level.
Yeah, all the way down to the transistors themselves, not just individual.
Yeah,
packages.
It's one thing to go and consider and build, a beautiful ECU based on board based on others' chips, but then you're left with picking the best, and you're left with a lot of things in that mix. Not only are you trying to, the software teams often will demand this chip, would love to have this chip, but then they can't really source or board that chip because of who knows what constraints. Like they can't build, let's say you wanted some Snapdragon chip from Qualcomm, and you wanted, this, and they say, well, we can't do that. We can't run those number of units for you, and we're not going to support you at the board support level. So having a silicon team co-resident in the same company, I don't think people realize how amazing that is, and what the benefits that brings to Tesla. It's quite extraordinary.
That's one of the reasons why the Hardware 3 computer was, such a leap forward when they originally came out with it compared to anything that they could buy from NVIDIA or anyone else, because they were using, other people's hardware before that.
Right.
And that integration all the way down to the silicon. But even though they already had, software, and to Elon's point, maybe they did misspec it somewhat, but even not having, perfect foresight into the future and making the thing that would fully, do all of the things that they wanted it to do by the time they solved the software challenges at a higher level, it still was way, 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 way better than anything else out there. And I think, they, with the amount of experience they have now, they're making, I think, even higher quality decisions moving forward.
Yeah,
so,
I think they're I think they've hit their stride on what FSD is from an architectural point of view, and what the software demands are. And remember, when I say software demands, I want to be kind of clear about this. The software team is doing more than just kind of standing up a model and saying, go run, like put this thing on. They're tuning the hell out of that at a system level on FSD. I would say, after you get a trained model and after you've validated it virtually, in training runs in the cloud, the data center, and you said, okay, this is a great model. Now you've got a whole host of things that are required to get that thing to run at 36 hertz on the device in a consistent, clean way. So the amount of like software teams got a lot of work at Tesla. It's not just an AI team and then they kind of, you know, it's not like you cookie cut the AI and just throw it out there and it works. You've got an enormous amount of work to do at the sensor to, it's kind of like what I'll say, the photon to control cycles to understand exactly how that stuff gets put on and how it runs and to optimize it and to get it to run consistently at the highest inference rate possible takes extraordinary amount of effort, like very tedious work, by the way, like really, really tough stuff. And the point about that is that tedious work has great benefit because they're essentially effectively kind of counting the cycles through the system. They're like, where's the data go? How does it flow through memory? How does it load onto the GPU? Where does it go? What does the inference cycle look like? Like at the processor level, they're counting the cycles, if you will. They're counting the memory fetches. They're doing all that stuff, and so they're able to see like what the latencies are in the system, whether they're compute bound or IO bound. Right? It's like, is it problem getting the data or is it problem computing the data? And they can run this through, and then they can say, okay, we see what the silicon is doing for us, and we've reached the end of optimization. We've hit the limit on what we can do to optimize this particular AI schema. I want to say it that way for a second. We'll maybe define that in a minute on this type of architecture. And then they can press with the silicon team to say, but if we could just put this in silicon, or we could have a larger cache, then we'd have less memory fetch from external memory, and we get better performance in this particular way. And they could characterize it at an extremely granular kind of way, like a way that the decisions become clear, that if you're going to spend 2x the amount of money on the chip for high speed cache memory, it's worth it or it's not worth it. And you can make those trade-offs because of this tight integration between these teams. Without that, you're left with effectively none of that. You have to just overbuy from a software perspective. It's like, the efficiencies are translated not only into a system that runs well, but it's also economic efficiencies at scale, because now you're able to build a chip that does the work you want it to do, the way you want it to do that work, and pay the least amount of money for that benefit, as opposed to if you were to source a NVIDIA chip and turn 2/3 of it off for FSD because you didn't need, well, you're still spending money on the other 2/3, right? So this is good that they're doing this, and then it leans forward as the more they, FSD as a system. Maybe we could talk about it this way. In these articles I write on FSD, there's the last two were part 8 was about that FSD and Optimus are the same AI, and I believe they're completely the same AI. We can talk a bit about that. And then the last article was on, what does it mean to build a reasoning system on top of this, which is the high demand from Optimus, right? Our expectations of what we would expect out of Optimus from a reasoning perspective is much higher than what we expect out of FSD, until we start to see those things in FSD, and then we realize, oh, we want them there too. So what's kind of cool about this from a Tesla perspective is you have one AI team building one AI model that serves the FSD product and the Optimus product. And that's, literally a beautiful thing, right? And how are they similar? Well, obviously, the sensor inputs are are slightly different, but they share an enormous amount of the same sensor data. They're vision-based systems. Largely, the input tokens to the AI are largely vision based, photon digitized recordings of pixels, essentially. And you have audio stream, and then probably Optimus adds the touch sensors for hands and so forth as a kind of different input, but they share kinematic inputs like the IMU and GPS and that type of thing. And then on the output side, well, okay, they're very different, but they're the same in the sense that, with FSD, the outputs are, I like to say, somebody smarter than me said it's 2 degrees of freedom. In other words, the idea is that the output on FSD is really steering angle and accelerator, either positive acceleration, which means that you're, actuating control on the accelerator, or negative acceleration, which means you're either regeneratively braking or using brake control, right? Physical brake. So on Optimus, you've got many, many more degrees of freedom, 100 plus, because you've got the hands and elbow and the shoulder, just like us, head, torso rotation, knee, feet, all that type of thing. And so those are the outputs for Optimus. But from a compute core, from the AI side, it's the same. Now, what does it mean to say it's the same? Well, at first you might say, well, they're both neural networks. Yeah, but they're the same architectural neural networks. A lot of people, when they think about FSD, they think of it as like, okay, it's been described as an end-to-end unified model, and it is, but that doesn't mean that the interior of it is uniform. It's modular, and it's just trained end to end.
There are blocks that are attached together, but it is fully attached.
Yeah, exactly. That's a way of thinking about it. The blocks, essentially, the interior of it is largely a mixture of experts architecture. And what that means is that there are little blocks inside there that are really good at doing certain specific things. Now, let's just take an example in FSD, and then we can walk it back to Optimus. In FSD, you could say that there is a block that's really good at highway driving, and there's another block that's very, very good at navigating intersections. Those are very, very different things, right? I mean, we output the same controls, but driving on a highway and driving through an intersection are completely different things. And now with FSD, we see a new block in there, which is a block that is capable of navigating parking gates. Okay, so in a mixture of experts architecture, typically what occurs here is that there's a weighting. Certain block is sort of turned on, and other blocks are turned back or turned off in the process. So some of these things you can think of as quite simple. It's like, well, if you're on the highway block is active, but the intersection block is completely dark, right? The parking gate block is completely dark. You're not at a parking gate. But what if you're approaching a parking gate and now the parking gate is swapped in? What effectively is going on here in kind of software terms is you've built yourself for things that are sequenced, steps that are sequenced through, like pulling up to a parking gate, waiting for the gate to open, proceeding. You're effectively building a state machine, right? But the cool thing is there's no code linking these blocks. There's no code. There's no algorithmic code. It's all AI. And that's for many people, that's a bit of a mind bender, because normally what you do is you think of these things as you say, well, I could see an AI that did this thing, and then an AI did this thing, and I would feed this thing to that thing logically. And like, give me an example of, imagine that you're talking to an AI like Grok, so you could think of it as, oh, well, there's this speech to text AI that occurs. So I talk to it, and then it outputs my speech tokens, in terms of words, right? I mean, like the words I speak, maybe some other stuff in there, but and then I force that into the LLM component, which then turns on it and answers the question, right? And then I've got a text to speech component because the thing talks back to me, and I can think of these things as logically like three boxes. Now there's some issues about how you're feeding the data through because the thing doesn't wait for you to completely finish. But ignoring that, you can think of it as kind of three blocks that are kind of linked by code, right? But in FSD, that's not like that. While it is these modular blocks in the interior, they're linked by an AI push and weighting the system to get these outcomes. Okay. Now, what's interesting about it is if you take what I said about FSD and you start to think of like what's really interesting is that 13 to 14 is a big switch. Okay. 13 was this sort of like clean driving, but no park to park, meaning none of those last 500-foot use cases were really in the stack at all, right? So like the car would just come to a stop. It wouldn't park in your driveway. It had no, it could never navigate or did not navigate a parking gate. It did none of those things. So now as you've got these like last 500 feet use cases on both ends, and people have called it park to park. That's fair, right? Starts in a park position, ends in a park position, but there's a lot that happens to get it out of the park position or into the park position that have nothing to do with the entire 90% of the use in the road miles, right? So when you start to think about 14, you're like, well, wait a minute, what did they do to make that work? Well, they trained all these subcomponents that do certain types of things, and then like the gate one is my favorite example because it's clean to think about, and they they say, okay, we have this gate expert or this weight, we'll call it a weight expert for lack of better, to keep it kind of horizontal, and now this thing is in the system, and now 13 to 14, like beyond parameter size, that's kind of the smallest change to the model. They've started to architect that interior to do these managed states. Now, I've talked a lot about this, but why does it matter? It matters for Optimus more. Well, I shouldn't say more than FSD. If you think about it, Optimus is taking that to the 100x level, right? Because its state management is much more granular, right? So imagine you ask Optimus to cook an omelet. Now it's got to do things that, at some higher level, it's got to gather stuff from a pantry or a refrigerator. There's the cooking task itself. Even the cooking task, it might be like, got to go in and melt the butter, and there's a bit of a wait there just to get that to happen before there's the skill or whatever you want to call it a skill or a block related to cracking the eggs. There's after I get this omelet done, I have to plate it, and then potentially clean up afterwards. So hopefully clean up afterwards. So that is like taking FSD with its internal and kind of putting it on steroids. It's like the next level. But here's the thing. As the Tesla AI team started to invent the AI for Optimus, it's helping to inform how to build the AI for FSD. And by the way, that is why the FSD in general, I should say the autonomy stack in a Tesla vehicle will always feel a lot different than anybody else's attempt at autonomy. Because everybody else is attempting autonomy from the use cases of just autonomy, vehicle autonomy, road driving, or even if it's park to park, even if they aspire to park, they are focused on that problem. They are not kind of dialed out to the generalized principle of the problem. And because Optimus is in the mix, it's a forcing function for Tesla to somewhat generalize the solution. Now, I would argue in a pretty convincing way, at least to myself, that FSD is the big brother in the room. It started this, and Optimus is the little guy, the little brother, But Optimus, I think, will start to have more of center attention and have more influence on the architectural design of FSD. And what that means is that FSD will exhibit much more lifelike behavior or sentient behavior because, you would.
They're just better at wrestling with semantics. And
Yeah, the Optimus, our if we bought an Optimus and we put it to use in our home, our expectations of how, from an interactivity to use, our expectations are very high, right? Very, very high. If you're building that in as a generalized thing and you're building that into FSD, then all of a sudden, stuff that you can do with FSD is way beyond just simple vehicle autonomy, right? You have a system that is much more interactive and expressive in terms of working with you, effectively the passenger, whether that's Robotaxi or your own owned vehicle with running FSD, suddenly you're not just, at some level, the goal of FSD is to get you out of the driver's seat and make you completely a passive passenger, right? But at another weird level, to create an amazing experience, you're also an active participant in that experience. You, as a user, are expressing a whole degree of preferences and desires on how you want that driving behavior or parking behavior to occur, right? And this is what I think. Like when I talked about FSD reasoning, I was leaning in heavily to this concept of the interactivity between the human and the car, because we view something as a much more, I don't know, a higher degree of intelligence or reasoning based system, the more we can interact and control the outcomes of its interaction, right? And so to give an example, we should have an expectation with FSD that when we approach a mall parking lot, we can say, yeah, drop me off at the main door. And then over time or in the loop, I'd rather go to door 2 after hours. It's where the restaurants and the movie theater are, and then this is internalized in its so-called memory or preference memory. And it just does that the next time, after hours, door 2 is probably where Phil wants to go. And when I banish to parking, I could say, well, use the free lot unless the weather is inclement, then use the parking lot, the paid parking. And the thing starts to build up that kind of, that to a human, that's a reasoning system. So.
And so just to be clear, when you say that the Optimus AI is the same as the FSD AI, it is, you're making an architectural statement, and that, the experts that live inside of the Optimus
are different.
The individual blocks are going to be different blocks.
Yes.
But yes, it is a system that is, built up from the ground, from the sensor data to the reasoning to the actions in the same, basic information flow.
Yeah, I think that's a good clarification. I'm talking about architectural unification here, same architecture. I'm not talking about it's not as if you could take the FSD AI
weights,
14, and pop it into Optimus. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the overall architecture of the thing. And now it is up to the teams to train those expert blocks, but in other words, how you chain skills together in a cohesive way is the same in Optimus as it will be in FSD. I should say, FSD is built the first version of that. Optimus will mature it, and then it will systemically go across both systems as kind of like the next, so I'd say version, say 15 of FSD and version, 1 of Optimus will probably be identical architecturally. And then it'll be a matter of, as you say, those blocks inside, but how those skills get chained together and prioritized and operated, it will be largely the same thing. And then, just how our interactivity will be the same. It's very likely that Tesla will source, kind of coming full circle in our discussion, Tesla will source some components from XAI to do, we'll call it a medium-sized language model for the car, and maybe a larger one for Optimus, in the sense that, we have expectations of the car not just to listen to us and deal with driving controls, right? We're expecting it to interface to the driving stack, but we also would expect, kind of like, you might say, how many minutes to the airport? Oh, 47. Is my plane delayed? Well, that's now off stack, right? I mean, my plane delayed is not a driving thing. It's like, it's got to go interrogate a system. Yeah, your plane,
call tools.
Call out, agentic kind of things. Call out of the system. You might say, well, what's the weather what's the weather in Nashville? Oh, it's snowing. Okay, maybe that's the reason my plane is delayed, into Nashville or something. But so now you're putting a higher degree of interactivity on that vehicle or that bot, where you expect it just to be able to converse with you in a kind of normal way, and have access, much like you would expect, like Grok on the phone, to interact with you, except in this case, tightly integrated to the vehicle control side, right? And then expressive with its preferences there too, so it can remember things about, like you could say to it, in my neck of the woods, take 280 instead of 101 to when I'm going to San Francisco Airport, or while I'm on northbound 280 between Palo Alto and San Francisco, always stay below 79 miles an hour. And then that would remember that and keep that, and by the way, when it remembers that, it keeps your preferences. It travels mostly with your account, not the car. So then your preferences through every Robotaxi, it's like you got the same awesome Uber driver in every city you go to, right? It's the same person. It's like your chauffeur. It's like your personal chauffeur all of a sudden materializes in Miami, materializes in New York, materializes in Seattle, because it's really your preference stack that's associated with your account that's being conferred to the car.
Yeah, that was one of the parts of your article that I really enjoyed, because it helped me to understand, not just like, that's obviously the expectation that we want our cars to get to. I wanted it to park in my garage the way that I park in my garage. Right. I want it to do all these things. But I had conceptually, thought, man, that could be very difficult for, like, how do they encode those preferences like into the weights of the neural net? And then one of the things that I realized from the way that you had laid out the architecture of the system with, the revelations that Ashok made at the ICCV conference, that, they are having the ability to interact with the model through language. Yep. And so you can basically just have a context scratch pad, just like, if you use any of these ChatGPT tools or any of these things, like you can have your list of pre-made prompts, or, you can import a whole bunch of context to them. Yeah, you can have a context window that's basically attached to your Tesla account.
And it's very likely that they'll normalize that to the actual tokens that represent that, instead of doing that inference on the fly every cycle. In other words, you may start with a language-based set of preferences. It will probably end up as a set of fixed set tokens that represent that can be kind of translated once. And it can even be down at the more like the preference level, meaning like, I'll give you an example. Like imagine that you got 5 driving modes, right? Sloth, chill, standard,
Hurry.
hurry, and Mad Max. Okay. To me, those are just boxes of each of them are boxes probably of 15 different individual preferences or individual types of nuanced controls. For example, there might be max speed relative to the highway posted speed. There might be minimum offset to the vehicle in front of you. There might be a how hard should the car come to a stop, right? Soft or hard. There may be something that relates to
Gap size that you're willing to shoot in between traffic.
Exactly, gap size. And those things are then bundled together as a package of preferences that are then labeled Mad Max, labeled hurry. But imagine that you devolve them back to those fundamental preferences and you keep them around for that, for how Hans or Phil wants to do. So maybe we both like Mad Max, but you launch your offset to be different than me. And so I think ultimately the way, as FSD gets smarter, they will not express more preferences in the UI. They'll just let us talk to the thing. And we'll be expressing these preferences, and some things it won't be able to do, and it will probably tell you, I don't have a way to do that for you. But other things, it will then say, oh, what he really means is that's the offset distance. Imagine you said to it, I'm not comfortable getting that close to the car in front of me, right?
I don't want to have to buy him dinner.
Yeah. So exactly. So you're expressing the same thing in 2 different ways, and the system can translate that into one preference. And so the point is about this is that instead of this being encoded into the neural network in some way other than the logic of how it expresses itself, it's really input through the context window of the AI. It's like the data runs through, and they're going to optimize that to a set of clean tokens that do the thing. And some of the things may be more complicated. Like, for example, it may have to maintain a set of geofences that have properties attached to them. Like when I said before, what if I said, for example, in the city of San Jose, never run a yellow light? Well, that's a complex thing, right? Why don't I run a yellow light? Because the lights change very quickly in the city, and they have a bunch of red light cameras, and they're worried. The person's worried about that. So in the city of San Jose, never run a yellow, or just the expectation of people crossing is different than maybe in another city. So you're adding extra safety, right? Well, now you've got this kind of interesting thing. Now you've got to manage a geofenced area and a preference layer on top of the geofence. I mean, that's like, okay, that's next level, but it's almost like required to make the system operate in a way that feels right to you, right? So, yeah.
I've long been watching for Tesla to reveal what they're doing for their own in-house mapping solution, because especially like we know that they're doing that obviously for Robotaxi, and eventually you have to have that. Like if you really want unsupervised FSD to work on consumer vehicles, anywhere in the country, they have to have their own version of Google Maps that's vastly superior in data quality, up-to-dateness, and probably includes all sorts of features that are not included in the Google Maps data. And so, they, I know that they're doing something there. They just haven't been very
to kind of
forthcoming.
To kind of peel that onion a little bit, here's what we're saying. I wrote a post about this not too long ago. The FSD itself is getting so good that it is now starting to expose map problems. Which is ironic if you think about it, but it is where we're at. And so, just to be very clear,
which means that FSD is a superior product to Google Maps, performance-wise.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that So if you said this has quality A and this is quality B, you would say that this thing is higher quality and now it's exposing B, because it's Maps is becoming the weak link, because you see Maps like say, so how is Maps working with FSD? It's another input. It's the routing input. It is not FSD is making its own driving decisions, but it's guided by kind of the bigger picture of how Maps is informed it to route.
Where
right?
are we going?
Yeah, where are we going? It doesn't mean that it's going to follow it by the letter. It's sort of like the highly suggested route that's input through the context window. So it's the way the maps are like a puppet master, but in this case, the puppet may express some of its own moves. So what's not happening is FSD isn't map matching. It's not trying to match its actions to like a Waymo to the actual map. It's just using the map as an input to guide what street do I take. And then when it gets to that intersection, it's making its own decision about how it traverses that intersection. But the problem is if Maps gives it incorrect or bad data, it's that low quality data will affect its ability as a system to appear intelligent to you, right? Because the end user may never make the distinction between Maps and FSD like I just did, but they expect the system to them it's indistinguishable, right? Like it's a driving thing, so the Maps thing but they're totally separate products, right? And one is just sort of linked to the other, and so FSD is at the point where it's starting to expose the low quality map data that's there, and that's a problem that Tesla just has to tackle head on. I think it's one of the larger problems right now, frankly, with FSD Robotaxi scale. I think it's one of the largest problems. I think that driving without incident, I think, is not the problem here at all. Like, I think the fact that they have these safety riders still in Austin is interesting, but not terribly required. I think it's more about those people are able to report more or less data about the experience of the drive. Like, we dropped this guy off in the wrong spot. That's not correct. We got to get that fixed. Why is it doing that? There's nothing to do with the quality of the FSD product and the safety of the FSD product. It's just about how is the experience operating for the user. And frankly, those people in those cars are a set of eyes on the experience that there is no way that Tesla could get that data from user report. User's never going to give a nuanced report like you might get from one of these safety observers, whatever. So I think that's, what's happening with Robotaxi, and the reason we don't see it like pressing the scale button, in my opinion, is it's just largely a thing of they are learning from the experience of actually, for the first time in their lives as a company, running a rideshare platform. You just don't go from 0 to 1 on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that aspect of I knew that they were recording all sorts of data. Like a lot of times, even when I first tested the system back when it was launched, they would, after finishing a ride, that car would kind of go offline for a little bit.
Yeah.
And, presumably because that safety rider was, doing their after action report on that ride specifically.
100%. Yeah. And I think, that's been, even that process, Hans, is probably something that they started with, well, how are we going to run this thing? Well, after every ride, we're going to have this guy report. Okay. They did that for a week, and then they were overwhelmed by interpretation of data, and they're like, okay, now here's how you're going to report. So the next phase was, or only report on these things, don't report on those things, because those things are a box of problems that we're dealing with, and we don't need to hear that again, because those people are, intricate. They're in the same company, so they can do that. Whereas an end user could never do that, right? Never, like an end user is going to say, "Don't." I'm going to tell you about everything, and then you've got to have somebody filter that. So the live filter, in situ live filter, is the best way to do that, because that person can make an interpretation of what the customer feels like from an experience point of view and what the car did from an experience point of view. But they've had to mature that process itself over time to get more quality data to the engineering team. There's if you think about it, it's like a big funnel. There's all this data that's going into what is effectively a small actionable team, right? In other words, while you may have data come in and there's a triage and there's some people that sit on that bubble of triage, and then that information gets tighter to the core team, eventually it gets to the core team. But here's the thing. I know the DNA of how these companies operate. Tesla has its best people right at the fringe too, right? In other words, what I'm saying is, when the data comes in to Tesla, some of the most senior people are looking at it straight up. Okay. And that's a beautiful thing, but it's also a not scalable thing. It's beautiful because the problem gets interpreted correctly at the get-go, and then it gets to the proper solution fast. However, it elongates time. Effectively elongates time. It means that things start to get stacked because the core team is too small and the outer ring team is not trained enough to run interference for the core team. And Tesla's a company that, as an engineering-driven company, it doesn't build. Its natural DNA is not to build a lot of operational infrastructure. To its fault in this particular case, what I'm saying, or to its benefit, depending on how you look at it. It's a bit of a plus and minus type of thing, right?
Yeah, I just knowing how Elon operates, I would be shocked if Ashok has not actually been a safety rider now they probably waited until, there's less influencers around and people who might notice who it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, those guys love of putting people right at the problem spot. And if Ashok's going to be on the receiving end of all this data that all these safety riders are doing, he probably needs some seat time and understanding exactly.
Yeah, and I think when you say if I know Elon, it's not that Elon is just naturally commanding them. He's already hired the right person for the job that thinks the way he thinks. So the whole team is oriented like I've seen some posts by different engineers out there, and it's very, very clear that they are very involved at the interception point of data and customer. Very involved. Not spending their entire day doing that, because if they're not back at the office they're not solving a problem. But they're, as they're developing Cybercab, they're, the manufacturing to engineer. I mean, those guys developing FSD are in the factory sometimes. That's like, for some people, they'd say, what the heck are they doing in the factory? They're looking at how the cameras.
FSD drives in the factory, so they better.
Well, actually, it's a very interesting sub point. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point, because they've made it work there, and they've had to make it work there, right? Because in fact, it's kind of like I think
that's actually the genesis of the whole project. If I'm not mistaken.
It's a bit like how to test Robotaxi in a certain respect, right? It's like, I need to think. I mean, it's a bit about how to test it's a bit about how to do park to park too, right? This is the whole stuff that's evolved in 14. We know that 14's been out in the wild way before us customers got it. It's been on Robotaxi. It's I don't know what's happening. I believe any end of mile car right now that's traversing from the factory. Sorry, I should say. Any car that's leaving the factory on its own autonomous 2 feet, so to speak, um, is definitely a 14 stack for sure, for sure. Because it's doing a bunch of nuanced parking. It's finding a slot, or it's being assigned to a slot. So there's some logic there at the end of that ride that's not just straight up, stop the ride.
Yeah, so whatever they were working on for that park to park was probably born out of
Or
the neural net that they had, driving it off the end of the line and around to the delivery center there in Austin and those types of places.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to think, but it all comes back to, development of one stack, and ultimately one stack, and even across the two products, whether the interiors are the same or different, from the skills that are in there, so to speak, or the blocks. But yeah, I mean, all these little use cases that you see, if you zoom out, you start to think about them. You're like, well, heck, that Robotaxi does that, really, or my car is doing that, really. And you realize, okay, that's just the type of it's like, for example, like, how does it do the assigned parking spot type of thing? Well, I don't know, because, like, in other words, what's happening is when these cars, I don't know what they call it, staging a lot, when they're staged for eventual transport, they're going to a lot.
Yeah, I think they call them outbound lots.
Is that what they call them? Okay. They're either parking, they're parking in sort of some assigned version of parking. Like, these Model Ys go over here because they're about to be transported to LA, and these go over here because they're about to be transported to Seattle, or something like that. There's some logic involved in it. And so the cars have to know kind of where to go, and how do they know where to go, and how are they instructed? And that's some kind of map routing type of thing that's coming into play. That's at much more nuanced level, much more precise level, where they're directing it, or some other similarity to that. But whatever it is, it's very, very likely something that, the best way to think about this is, whatever they develop there is really a horizontally applicable skill or component that would be used in Robotaxi or consumer FSD, for sure.
So I have one more question for you on, all of the things that we learned from Ashok that was not necessarily as much in the article that you read. But one of my takeaways that I felt like is that Ashok was basically saying that they've been able to implement, Andrei Karpathy famously talked about having Operation Vacation for labeling data for FSD back in the day. And it seems to me like where they have gotten to now with the architecture to train version 14 and moving forward is basically Operation Vacation for the full end-to-end training of FSD that has very minimal human involvement and human interaction necessary in order to identify, why did FSD fail in this particular scenario? And we've got a whole software only pipeline to define exactly what was the error in the situation, right. And then generate a whole bunch of new RL test cases, run those, rechain the network, test its performance based on that type of thing. And so basically, I think we finally have the full software defined architecture that's necessary to get us, the last few nines necessary for FSD to be far safer than humans, basically all the time, everywhere.
Yeah, a good way of thinking about it is the holy grail of this, like the endpoint, the place you want to get to, is that the cars naturally bring in data. The pipeline processes in such a way that it trains the system automatically, hands off, and just makes it better, right? It discovers errors and fixes the problems automatically, self-heals or whatever, retrains, whatever you want to call it. Now, there's a lot of that's definitely not there. But where you could see them going over the years, and I would say years, is they've gone to a place where in the beginning it was really a perception side element to it. It wasn't the planning side, and planning side was still code based in version 11 and so forth. And they were, they're talking about supervised learning. That means that humans are in there labeling stop signs, and and as they've kind of leaned forward, they've gotten out of, like, they auto label the data, and they're getting out of that place now where there's a human in the loop. But the stack itself, one of the things that Ashok talks about quite expressively is this concept of interoperability. And what he's saying is, hey, you know what? We've trained this thing to be end to end. Now, that's a very specific thing in neural network speak. And it means that, I don't want to say it too technically, but it means that you run the gradient all the way back through. In other words, you 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 run the back propagation through the whole system as a whole. You don't train
you
it.
do a lot of calculus, like a lot of calculus.
Yeah. So, but it's a consistent. The data runs back consistently to the front, so to speak. The whole thing gets trained together. Everybody gets trained together, right? It's like imagine you had 5 little minions who do different tasks, but they all kind of learn. They're all part of the same. Like when this little minion is learning about how to do this part of the cooking the omelet, the other one's still observing. He's still sitting around looking at it, going, "Okay, okay, okay." That's probably a bad way of putting it, but it's somewhat relevant. And so, but what he did was he was talking about, okay, well, wait a minute. Here's the problem with if we do end to end training, we end up with something that's largely opaque. Like we go, okay, the only thing we know is we put this data in, and this operation came out, and that was wrong. Damn it. Now, how do we fix that? What do we do? How do we debug the system? And so he talks about this thing that they built, is that they output these intermediate reasoning tokens. Okay. And he quantifies them in 5 different categories. And while we could get into the weeds on it, the last category is a fun one where he says, well, the system has a mini language model built in. It can expressively. So you can then, as an engineer, you can go into the system and you can say, well, why did you take a right turn on red? Well, there was no, sign, or there was the law says that I can, but maybe there's a sign there, or maybe it's obscured, or maybe, and so the engineer could look at it and go, well, he wasn't supposed to take a right on red, but the car did. Why did it do it? It can ask the car.
I have one of those intersections that it turns right on red and it's not supposed to every
it's not
single
supposed
time.
to, right? And so there's something wrong there, right? And something that they need to address, and something they will fix. But the point is that they now have this way of doing this introspection where they can debug the system by actually asking it, like, why did you do that? And it can largely tell the engineer what's going on. Now, the cool part about that is when you get to that level of having the thing, that's why he calls it interoperability, is when you get these reasoning tokens, they become the basic inputs for higher level interactivity with the car from the consumer's point of view, right? So now the consumer isn't asking it, oh, well, why did you do that? But the consumer may be saying, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, right? And now the car can express the why of the things it does, and then can be interactive with the passenger in the vehicle. So this is so this is helping that they have developed, I guess, a big zoom out on this, okay, is they have developed a set of processes that we might call the data pipeline to training, that over time they chip away at the elements where there's still manual, operation in this manual, like to your points, like, well, how do I tee up a reinforcement learning use, like training cycle, right? It's a pretty tricky thing to do with hands off, right? You're like, okay, I want the car to do this to this, and I'm gonna in the simulator, I'm gonna inject these variables and I'm gonna create these trajectory paths. But you can imagine where so the car is getting these rewards. The agent, it's not really a car, it's running in the cloud, it's virtual, but it's getting rewards or penalties for behavior that let me give an example because it gets kind of weird without one. Imagine that you're trying to train it to avoid hitting a instantaneously emerging pedestrian in the road scene. Right? What do I mean by that? Like a guy jumps out from hidden behind a van into the road, and you're trying to train the system to avoid hitting the pedestrian. Like job number one, don't kill the pedestrian, right? Like kind of big bright line. Okay, so in reinforcement learning, what you do is you say, you're going to get a huge penalty if your trajectory keeps a constant velocity and runs right over that person, right? So the system will penalize you greatly. But then what you're doing is you're asking the car to take different trajectories and see how you might avoid doing that, right? So one type of thing, when I say trajectory, action, let's call it actions. One thing would be, okay, I'm gonna brake super hard, and I have enough stopping distance, and so I'm gonna brake super hard to avoid hitting the pedestrian. Okay, pretty good thing. But here's the problem: I'm going to be getting some level of penalty because I just got rear-ended from the car behind me, right? So I didn't kill the pedestrian, but I injured 3 people across 2 cars. Maybe not at fatal level, but pretty bad. So I'm going to assign some penalty to that. Okay. What's another action? Well, I could break the law and veer into the adjacent lane at a pretty good, clip. And unfortunately, I might sideswipe a car that's there, but the penalty's pretty small for that, even though, I don't really want to hit another car. But what did I not do? I didn't injure a human in that situation, right? I took 2 cars that going essentially the same speed, and I had them touch, and I got some minor body collision damage on the vehicles. So in a reinforcement learning system, you're going to say to the system, okay, I want you to train to minimize the penalty or maximize the award associated with that, and then the system internalizes that. Well, in some kind of rigorous fashion, you need to set up all these conditions in that system, right? But what you can do is you can say, well, if I have the compute, and this is inference compute here, right? Because what we're doing is we're effectively running the stack in a virtual car, in part of the training loop. It's inference. If I have the compute, then I can run thousands of actionable trajectories and let the system kind of just work it out on its own. Sometimes there's adjacent lanes without vehicles. Sometimes there's adjacent lanes with vehicles passing. Sometimes there's no vehicle behind me. Other times there's a vehicle right behind me. Other times, blah, blah, blah. So ultimately, the answer is that you want to get to a place where the system can self-heal or self-train. I don't know where they are on that continuum, but that's ultimately what you want it to do. Now, what you don't really want it to do is, you're not. This is different than saying that you want an individual car. One of the things that's misunderstood when I talk about this, or people talk about this in general, is, and today many people think, hey, if I do this, I'm training my car to do this. Never. You're never training your car to. You think you're training
not until we get the context thing that we were talking about earlier, where your preferences are encoded into some sort of.
Yeah, and that's different than training it specific. Like it's never going.
Yeah.
Tesla is never going to allow a fleet of 8 million cars to be trained differently by different drivers. That's a nightmare for 1.7 billion reasons. Like it's an insane nightmare of you can never figure out what's going on with that. You can inject, as you said, context into it. So you're training it by preference, but you're not going to be driving the car in a particular way. And the car is going to say, I see, like, for example, if you're, right on red scenario, you could take the car manually and do that 1,000 times, and your car's not going to make a better decision there in FSD mode until they eventually get that data in the system and they retrain the whole, like the model, and you get the model. Like when you get that model in that version, that can be different, right? So the difference between 14.1.4 and 14.1.5 could identify and solve that problem. But within 14.1.4, that problem isn't going to solve itself. Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, maybe this is a good place to wrap up the discussion for today. I really, really appreciate you hanging out with us today, Phil, and helping people to get a deeper and richer understanding of where we're at today and the crazy complexities and difficulties of where we're going. And yeah, just to circle back to if Elon can execute on these crazy ambitious goals that, like we said, are extremely, extremely difficult and require a lot of dedication and hard work. But I think that's what motivates Elon. He's like, oh, this is going to be hard again. Let's go. Let's have fun.
Yeah. He's got that in his DNA.
Yeah. But yeah, that's where we're going. And it means that Tesla will accomplish some crazy important things for the world, and that those of us who are willing to stick with it might just enjoy the ride a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing about Tesla, and the thing that I think unnerves a lot of people, right? And why there's so much, I mean, outside of Elon tweeting or any personality or politics or any of that kind of stuff, you just subtract all of that and you say, why does the process at Tesla sometimes annoy people or unnerve people, as maybe everybody's saying, is because it's an engineering forward company. Its founder is an engineer, and we are partaking in watching how the sausage is made. We're not just sitting down in a restaurant eating like every other company. Apple never really tells you much about how the sausage is made. We're in the kitchen and we're watching it happen, and we're watching, somebody drop the sausage on the floor and rinse it off and throw it in the pan. We're watching all that stuff happen, and or how it's made, if you will. And so that's unnerving for a lot of people. For people like me, it's exciting. It's interesting. I mean, I've been doing those things all my life. So, but I sometimes I have to step back and realize this is not it doesn't have that clean marketing exposure, marketing veneer.
Not comfortable for normies.
It's not comfortable for a lot of people. And I mean, the look, if you go and buy a Tesla in a Tesla store, all that kind of is but if you're involved in the process, you're on X, you're talking about it, like you're like, oh my God, what is Elon doing today? Oh my God, I don't even know how to digest that. So, yeah.
Well, it's definitely exciting and keeps us all on our toes. And I feel like, the last month or two specifically has just been another one of those paradigm changing times in the company where there's a lot of things that we've thought for a long time that are coming into clearer focus. But at the same time, I think his pay package really does point a new direction for just how grand the scope and the scale of the ambitions are.
Yeah, that's my takeaway. It's not, I mean, Elon doesn't really care about the money, for God's sakes. This is not what this is about. And people who think that are just really misinformed. It's mostly about the control to build. he wants unfettered control to build the thing the way he wants. And I think he believes Elon's a very simple person when you listen to him speak. He does what he says he's going to do. It's not that complicated. He doesn't necessarily do it on the timeline he says he's going to do it all the time, but if he's concerned about something, he tells you he's concerned about something, that's kind of what he's concerned about. And so all the stuff that he was talking about, the pay package, people could come up with this idea, oh, he's just saying that because he wants 25%, because he wants a lot of money. Well, what's he going to do with this money? Well, okay, at best he's going to fund a Mars mission. He's not going to go buy a yacht. So it's interesting to see into the mind of him, because he's very transparent about it, frankly. He's very transparent. But what's happening is, as you said, Hans, this pay package is exposing if you just look at, for example, where we started, full circle in this conversation, the $400 billion EBITDA exposes the amazing company enterprise that has to be built to support that type of outcome. And, never bet against Elon, because he's pretty likely going to do it. And then we're going to watch some crazy scale out things happening. And they're going to start soon. For sure. So.
Yeah, it is very reminiscent of, we're going to build a battery factory in Nevada. And that battery factory is going to have an equivalent amount of manufacturing capacity for lithium ion batteries as the entire world makes today. And people thought, well, you're dumb and retarded, and get out of here with your crazy Silicon Valley tech bro talk.
Yeah. Well, it's always been, for Elon, has always been, it is vertical integration out of necessity. That's something people need to really understand. Like, it's a very vertically integrated company. It'll go down to lithium mines if necessary, but only if necessary. And I think that's the thing, is that if you think about during the shareholders meeting, Herbert asked a question right out of the gate, and he asked Elon, "How do you think?" And Elon had two answers. He was given a little bit spoon-fed too many examples, so he didn't really get to the core of it. But one was, he thinks, like, when problems are extremely far off, he tries to estimate by orders of magnitude, right? Can I do this with 1 million? Can I do it at the next order of magnitude? 10 million, or is it 100 million problem? Oh, it fits right in the middle. I need to build a factory for 10 million. Okay, cool. Now, what does it now he has to back that out and try to figure out, what does it take to build a factory for 10 million? He might be off by a couple million, but he's not off by an order of magnitude. So that's one thing he expressed as how he thinks. The second thing was exactly what we talked about. Tesla is not necessarily an expert in any particular thing until we need to be an expert in a particular thing, and then we go and tackle it and become an expert in a particular thing. Right. And that leads to this idea of vertical integration out of necessity. There's a point where he says, well, in order to get there, I need to do it myself. There's nobody that's going to, there is no supply chain for actuators there is no, I can't get enough chips out of Taiwan Semi and Samsung combined. I need to build a fab. These aren't things that he wants to take on just whimsically or because they're fun. I think he would probably argue most days, I have my hands full. Like, what was he saying? I'm spinning a lot of plates or something. He was referring to the fact somebody was asking him, I might be mixing up the context here, but I think somebody was asking him about doing something like building a phone. And he's like, I kind of am spinning a lot of plates right now. He recognizes that his plate, not to double use the term here, but his plate is full.
Yeah.
But he's like, well, geez, if I have this big vision and this big dream and I know how to get there, it's an execution thing. I have to start to go build these things or I'm never going to get there. And that's kind of the crux of maybe part two of how he thinks.
Yeah. Does the phone have any impact whatsoever on whether we have a self-sustaining civilization on Mars or a future of sustainable abundance, or climb the Kardashev scale?
Yeah, it's probably better for him to just let that dog lie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So can't do everything. Right.
100% agreed. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is so fun. Love getting to observe all of the, all of the events, all of the, like you said, the way that he thinks, and just the crazy time in history that we're at too. That, it is so unlikely,
So
it seems, on the one hand, to have some of the personalities that we have that appear on the scene at seemingly just the right time, as we have all these technologies that are converging together and making so many of these new technologies
yeah, and I think,
possible.
just to comment on that briefly, is that I think that's something that I think a light bulb went off in Elon. He's talked about this, so it's not like I'm even observing something that isn't obvious. He has started to see the emergence of AI as something that for years he was worried about the path it would form. And, he's talked about the most important thing is to build a truthful AI. And I think in his mind, the most important thing is to build the best AI that's competitive with other AIs, because there is no solution in his mind based on influence alone, right? So Elon's, if you go into Elon's tool chest, he's a creator. So he solves problems through the making of things. So if he's worried about something like how AI will do something, he's best oriented to fix it by doing, right? Um, for example, it's interesting to watch his behavior with the Doge thing that was, arguably difficult for him to do. But did you notice what he did? He didn't spend his days politicking on Capitol Hill and bringing charts about deficits to people and influencing people. Maybe it would have been a better idea if he had. But what he did was he went to start. He didn't just. By the way, he didn't just start asking a team to go through a bunch of financials or systems and look at money. He started to build an AI to solve a problem. Like, I can go solve this problem. I get a bunch of smart kids in a room and build an AI to dissect the entire, financial and money flows of the U.S. government. Note how he solved the problem. It's not something like when you saw, or I saw, or maybe not you, but certainly when I saw him go into that, I didn't think he was going to solve the problem that way. I didn't think he was, but then I should have known better. I should have known better based on who he is. His solution to problems is, I'm going to create something to solve a problem. Uh, you know, and that's kind of, sometimes that's where he falls short of solving a problem more on a, they say it on a, more political or social
Yeah.
kind of construct, because he doesn't spend
He solved
time.
the information theory problem of how it's operating.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But not
not
the
the
not the
political one.
human, yeah, the political or human one. And you can see the same thing right now emerging with FSD, right? The idea is, well, I'm going to get the thing 80 times better than a human driver, and then the data is just going to fall into place, that it's inescapable, that the regulatory frameworks, and if I get a few wins through the Waymo doors that have been open for me, then the whole world's going to collapse on me. He's probably right. He's probably right. But guess what he's not doing? You don't see him spending, well, we don't see him, certainly, but I don't think he spends a lot of time on it, frankly, politicking about the regulatory state of autonomous driving. I think he just thinks it's going to fall into place with a better solution, and that's how engineers always think. So
Hopefully he's right. Yeah, because it is
hopefully
kind of
he's
a
right.
big if.
Yeah, it's always a big if.
Yep.
All right, Hans.
Well, yep.
So,
Everyone, enjoy this episode. Hopefully we will see you again in the not too distant future together, and have a great afternoon.